approach to the stage. I'll try not to jiggle it too much. Let me see if we can get a little closer here. Oh, there you are. You're a pretty good-looking guy in that white hair there, isn't it? It's blinking, does it? We'll have to push it again and make it go? Joe Dan? It's blinking, but it's not counting.
It's blinking, but it's what?
It's not counting.
I don't know that word. Pounding?
Counting. The seconds.
1, 2, 3, count. I've never known it to count. I don't even know what that means.
Well, normally when it's running, it tells you how many seconds have been shot and how many is left. It's just, right now,
it doesn't always do that.
It's blinking right now.
Well, if it's blinking, really, that's all you need. The
Is that
counting
all right?
thing is occasional, sporadic.
Sporadic.
Yeah.
Boy, in this modern age, it's sporadic. That's
That's the red button.
I'd say most of the time it does not actually count.
okay.
We just want to watch you get back on stage again.
I've just been real lucky then. It always counts when I've used it in the past.
Sound check.
You got it, sir.
Sounds pretty good out here.
My name is Joe Dan Boyd, and you're not. So I want to read two pieces today from a friend of mine named David Clark. He lives at Cochran, Georgia, and the reason I know him is for about 7 years, sometime since I moved back here in '97. At some point after that, David became what the Brits would call a public figure. You and I might call it a public figure. The Brits like to say public figure. David is not a Brit, he's a Georgia guy. He spent the night with us one time, and I showed him the farm afterward. The name of the farm at the time still is the name, but at the time it was getting a little bit of publicity as New Ground Farm. And so I showed him New Ground Farm. And David at that time had as a public figure, he had, among other things, a syndicated column that appeared in a whole lot of newspapers around the country. Some of the very biggest newspapers available at that time. This was before newspapers started their decline, and when everybody still read the newspaper. And he had built his syndicated column from scratch, you know, he just on his own personal interactions with editors around the country. He also sang songs, played a guild guitar. He read poetry. He told Uncle Remus stories. There was very little that David Clark did not do, and everything he did was done quite well. He and I became friends because he wanted to become a writer. And he had called my friend Charles Johnson. At that time, Charles and I had spent decades with Farm Journal magazine, and he had said Charles lived in Knoxville, Tennessee at the time. And he contacted Charles because he lived fairly close to him. He knew who I was from having read Farm Journal and other magazines, but he didn't think Texas was close enough to establish a relationship. Well, Charles didn't have time to mess with him, so he told him to call me. And so I read some of his work, and I was really, really impressed. And I told him, I said, you know, David, you want to write, and you are already a writer. You're what I call a born writer. I divide writers into three categories. The born writer, those who have never had any training but have it inborn into their genius. I call the trained writer somebody who's maybe had journalism training or creative writing or some other kind of formal training in writing. And then the third kind is the combination of the two. Somebody who's had both, who's a born writer but also has had formal training. And David had not had any training in it, but he was as good as any writer I'd ever read at that time. And so he and I became friends, sort of. He kind of adopted me as sort of a mentor, I guess. And I was so impressed with his writing, I wanted to read everything he wrote, and he was sending me copies of all of it. Well, that tells you, he was just an unusual kind of guy, a unique person. And I remember Colin, one of my sons, was visiting me Wednesday of this week, and Peggy and I were telling him about David Clark. And Peggy's description was, he was very unique. And I had the temerity to correct her and say, there are no degrees of uniqueness. You're not any kind of, you're either unique or you're not. Yes or no, unique or not unique. And David was and remains unique. Still lives in Cochran, Georgia. He's no longer a public figure. He no longer does the syndicated column. All that lasted about 7 years, and he toured the country. He went to all kinds of places in the U.S. to perform. People had tip jar. Some places he charged just for the appearance, this sort of thing. And some places he was satisfied with the level, which is the way it was at Tenney Chapel when he performed there a few times. Well, recently David has got back in touch with me, and he is now full-time electric motor repairman. He said everybody that he works with or for calls him Dr. Vogt, V-O-L-T, Dr. Vogt. But he still does occasional writing. And he sent me this one, copyright 2020, titled Not Adrift. And while I've read probably a dozen that he's written just in the last few weeks, this was the one that spoke to me in a way that I told Peggy, I said, you're not going to read this as poetry. Not because it's intended as poetry, but because it's prose that has a certain lyrical quality to it. And it's 500 words. David writes everything in 500 words. That's the number of words that a syndicated column, at least in his day, called for. So every time he would send in a column, it was always 500 words. Couldn't be any more, couldn't be any less. And so this one is called Not Adrift, which in itself, is not a title that necessarily pulls you in because it creates some kind of question, or at least in mine. But since it was by David Clark, I said, yeah, I want to read this. And then I decided I want to read it to you guys. A lot of his poems now are written as letters to actual individuals. Like someday he may write one, a letter to Jovan. And maybe that's what he'll call it, but it's say copyright 2020, 500 words. And everything he writes is in that format. I mean, that's the way he learned to write, and that's the way he still writes. So think in terms of what does the phrase mean, not adrift? And then use your own imagination. Here is the 500 words. We all get busy. We believe much of our busyness is important, but if it were nearly as true as we believe, we would not wonder, my Lord, where is all the time gone? The Lord knows. We all know exactly where it went. We wasted most of it on things that seemed important or fun. I am indignant with myself as I make such a blanket statement. But I look through this lens. I am now 61 years old. My daddy died 21 years ago, this coming October. The kid that was born the day Daddy died becomes a man this year. I learned a lot in my first 21 years. The next 19 years were a rushing carnival of time wasting, and suddenly I was 40. One October day that year, Daddy was a very alive, 82-year-old man. The next day, he was cold in the mortuary. I was cast adrift in a life raft on a stormy sea. All my life raft held was my son's birth and not enough hours with him or my folks. Before the lifeboat, everything was bright lights in the midway at the time-wasting carnival. It's all some variant of shooting ducks with a crooked barrel gun. When our 3 shots were missed, we were left with ridiculing bystanders and a greasy man trying to sell us 3 more shots. There were Ferris wheels that we saw sights below. There were bumper cars where strangers crashed into us. Bullet rides fiercely swung us around. Fake horses bobbed up and down, going nowhere in a circle to silly music. The best memories of the thing are the elephant ear and finally finding the car to go home. People no longer invite me to the carnival because I'm no longer standing idly waiting for someone to ask. I've been there. Get the point? I've traded 100 Ferris wheels for a shady afternoon with my dogs and someone who loves me enough to let me be just who I am. I've still got my life raft of important things. It occupies a special place next to the compasses in the pilot house of this ship I am building. So I had to make room for examples of worthwhile time spent in this last phase, and I had to make room for the very best moments to come. This ship has not been adrift. It's been tied up fast to a stable dock. I've got maps, charts, and guidance from a few old sailors, and the conversations with the occasional curious young sailor who wonders about the difference between life rafts and ships. I'm fitting all my timbers close, my gear safely stowed. I'm keeping close watch on my timepiece now and listening for a signal that I will hear one day. The destination is plotted, the distant shore awaits. The signal's calling time is yet unknown. The only certainty is its sounding. When I hear the sound, I will sail away. And I told David that I wanted to read this at Live Poets Society. So a few days later, he sent me another one, and he said, if you have, let me see, what exactly, sending this short piece, if you have time to share with your poets group. This is one that he really wanted you to hear. And that's the only reason he sent it. By the way, what did it make me think of? I'd say this, after I read it silently to myself, the first thing I thought of was the Hank Williams theme song. Herding the dark clouds out of the sky, making the heavens blue. You know, just that old song, Happy Roving Cowboy. herding the dark clouds out of the sky, keeping the heavens blue. That was what I thought of when I read this, after I'd finished reading. He says, by way of explanation, I was approached by a blind man and his wife after a show. This was a show back during his 7 years as a public figure. And he thanked me for bringing the world alive to him with descriptions. Asked me to write him a letter and tell this blind man what the sun looked like. And he gave him his address. And this is the letter that David wrote to him, condensed. Well, it doesn't say 500 words on it, so maybe looks like it's even no more than that. So it's well within his 500-word parameter. Here it goes. A blind man asked me, what does the sun look like? The sun, I said, moves graceful on her path, changing every day and skipping along just a bit like a girl, but constant and steady like the woman she really is. At dawn, the sun is soft like a woman's lips, barely touching your closed eyelids in such a way that you're not sure if it's her flesh or her breath that causes you to quiver. Pretty soon the sun becomes clearer. Now it's her nose in the valley of the side of your neck, below your ear. Her breath is more plain now and stronger. Her teeth bite softly into the fleshy part between the valley below your ear and your Adam's apple. In the middle of the morning, her left hand fits the middle between your shoulder blades, and her right hand fits your chest. At noon, her hair is just a bit too much in your face, making it a bit hard to breathe. Mid-afternoon, and she is pressed up full against your neck. If you didn't love her so, you might move over just a bit because it's almost too hot. But you think about the cooler days when it's just right, and the endless cold days when she wasn't to be found. And so you decide that her fullness pressing up against your neck isn't so bad after all. Then she starts getting over in the western sky. As nice as the rest of her faces are, this is perhaps the most beautiful. Maybe it's because you do not soak up quite enough of her, and now she's about to go away for a while. And sometimes she calls in help from nearby clouds, and she shows the world her beauty by showing off the golden outlines in even the most dreary puffs of gray. Their streaks of pink race across the sky, which is just another name for her lips pressing soft and clinging one more long last time before she goes, just because she cannot stand to leave you without coming back for another minute more. And then she is gone. Gone. David Clark of Cochran, Georgia.
Rise and the set of the sun, that's what he was talking about.
Yeah.
I never would have thought of those words to describe it.
Well, that's really, I think, why he is such a good writer. He thinks of things that most of us don't think about. The description is his forte. Some people say forte. Check the dictionary, the correct pronunciation is forte. It's his forte, and he does it really well. We're going to conclude, as usual, with a paragraph from How to Read a Poem, subtitled And Fall in Love with Poetry by Edward Hirsch.
To read Keats in good faith is to breathe in those devastated and devastating lines, to take up the offer of his flesh and blood hand. He holds his hand toward you in a fierce, plaintive gesture of poetry that tries to go beyond poetry. One imagines his hand moving furiously across the page and then suddenly stopping. The truth was intolerable. The reality that his actual hand would be replaced by these living lines of poetry seems to have given him no comfort. Still, his lines must carry as much of him as possible now. They're all that's left. The poet perceived this in advance. He gave his word for it. Take it up as if you were taking his hand. And that's good advice for any poetry, I'd say. The poet perceived this in advance. He gave his word for it. Take it up as if you were taking his hand. I love that. There's no music night at Tenny Chapel tomorrow, thanks to the governor's public health edict. Thanks tonight to Conrad Wolfman, David Clark, for the use of this wonderful facility. We're grateful. We always will. Thanks to Conrad for spending time sorting through his latest acquisitions of printed poetry, reading from each of them briefly, offering them for sale at discount prices to us. Just a wonderful, genial host for Live Poets Society. Conrad Wolfman, we love you.
All right, Conrad.
Here.
I'll take that $20 bill now, please.
Yeah.